Welcome everyone to this Wise Women's Roundtable with a look at what's going on still within this Beltane window as we are approaching a total lunar eclipse and the solar zenith days, and all of this is like in an in-between time. So when we think about the cross quarters, they're between eclipses and solstices. And so we're between eclipses, solstices and equinoxes. We're between eclipses. We are also in a Mercury retrograde. so there's a lot of between energy here, meaning things are not like normal time. So the first thing I want to just say is I have been really looking at time for a long time. As a child, I was interested in how everything that just happened became history. That the whole day, that whatever I had just gone through, and I found that upsetting. And my mom didn't really know how to respond to that. So looking at time, and the ancients looked at time, sacred time, or they were looking at cyclical time. We tend to be more conditioned into chronological time or Chronos time, sacred time, as the Greeks called it, Kairos time, or when maybe there was an opportune time, or there was some magic that was happening in a between space where time wasn't in its normal chronological flow, as they recognized that there were these two different kinds of time. We have become more conditioned in chronological time based on calendars and clocks. And it's not a bad thing. It's just we also need to be aware that there's other kinds of time to tune into. So especially like what's happening in the greater reality of the how are the mysteries informing us? How are we being informed by them, and how are we helping to inform them? So one of the things I wanted to say is we're recording this on Friday the 13th, and that is a calendar time. And Friday the 13th became an unlucky day, and that was partly to disconnect us from the power and the magic of the number 13. It's also, Friday is Venus's day. It's named after the goddess Freya, Norse goddess. And so Friday the 13th was a time when many cultures would celebrate the divine feminine, the goddess, in some form. And part of the patriarchal dominator control paradigm was to disempower that. So we've got that time going on. Plus now in a couple of days, May 15th and 16th, we're going to have a total lunar eclipse, an acceleration of time. So what happens is in a total lunar eclipse, we go from a full moon to, the darkening of the moon, and we see all the different moon phases, to the blood red moon, and then back to all the different phases, back to a full moon in about 3 to 5 hours, something that normally takes about 30 days. So it's a compressing or accelerating an experience that we usually would have about a month to experience into a few hours. And so I often think of it as like, if we are accelerating time in that way, whatever intentions we're holding can also be accelerated into their manifestation. Just something to know. The other thing about a total lunar eclipse is, and it will be visible in the US and South America, and depending on your time zone. So May 15th into the 16th, depending on your time zone, is when this eclipse is happening. And when we're looking at the shadow on the moon, what we're looking at is the shadow of the earth on the face of the moon. So the earth, we as the people of the earth, are looking at our own shadow. And it's a Scorpio eclipse, very powerfully connected to the shadow. So this is a great time to do some shadow work, to look at the things we're afraid of, to look at the things that maybe we have repressed, suppressed, denied, or not willing to look at, or haven't been willing to look at before. And to allow ourselves to really tune into that, because unless we can integrate those shadow parts of ourselves, we really don't have wholeness. So it's a great opportunity for that. And then the last thing I want to just share about is the solar zenith. So on May 20th, coming up pretty quick also, actually the 19th, 20th, and 21st is the time when the sun enters, is with the Pleiades. It's very close. It's, enters 1 degree, and then is exact and then leaves 1 degree. Now, in some places, maybe where you are, Elizabeth, they have solar zenith days. And that's when the sun is directly overhead. And they marked those days as more important than the equinoxes and solstices, because if you're close to the equator, you don't have that much of a difference in the seasons. But the solar zenith days was something that they could really tune into. And in where the pyramid Kukulkan is in Chichen Itza, it's at a latitude where the sun conjuncts is directly overhead when it's conjunct the Pleiades exact. And it's part of how the Mayans were tracking the 26,000 year cycle. So they saw that about every 26,000 years for a period of time, like at least 144 years, we could say there's this transition time, but it only can happen every 26,000 years for a period of time. And so at Chichen Itza, the days of no shadows is when the sun is directly overhead. So if you have a stick in the ground, or you're standing straight, or anything, there's no shadows cast on the pyramid, nothing. There's just no shadows anywhere when the sun is directly overhead. And they literally built zenith tubes. So they were these tubes that went down into the ground several feet, several meters, and they opened up into a cave. And so the only time that cave would be lit would be on a solar zenith day. So they were working the magic, connecting the earth and the sky, connecting the sun to, and they would do their big ceremonies in these caves where the sun was lighting them up based on when the sun was directly overhead. Now, different latitudes will have different solar zenith days. So it's not going to be the same from 0 to 23.5 degrees. Those days do shift. It's not the same for everybody, whether it's 23.5 degrees north or 23.5 degrees south. The day that the sun is on the zenith is different. So in some places it might be August, in some places it might be May and different days on May and November. So the solar zenith days are really exciting. And if you want to know more about it, there will be a video link in the show notes. And so here is just starting to look at the mysteries of time and how we experience it. And I'm now going to pass this off to Elizabeth, who's going to wow us with more experiences around what she perceives is happening in this time.
Thank you so much, Galen. So I'm wowed at the moment by what I've been noticing in the past period of time since our last discussion. And it would help, I think, to describe a little bit of how I see time, because I don't see timelines at all. I see an ocean of time, and that we are constantly micro-navigating this ocean. And so a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, the highest and best timeline. And I often want to correct the issue, even though that's what they're perceiving. So it's fair for them to be able to perceive that and say, well, there is no highest and best timeline. They all go to the same place. They all lead you home to source. And it's how you're going to utilize your experience on that ocean and navigate your reality every minute. That's why being so present is where all the action is. And so that being said, what's happening on this ocean of time? Well, there are inevitabilities. They look like islands, sort of, on this big ocean of time. Like it was inevitable that I was going to have my 3 children, or it was inevitable that I picked the teacher that I did. And that island, because if you imagine the island being sort of round, there's an infinite number of ways that you could have got to that island, because there's an infinite number of micro navigations that you could have taken. One way or another, you were headed towards that island. And that's what's so cool about understanding and navigating consciousness. Well, there's a big inevitability in front of us. And it's more than just an island, it's like a continent. And it's something that I think we're all aware of, if at least subconsciously or subtly. And we have names for this big, huge thing, and we call it New Earth. And we call it homo luminous or becoming the new human, or there's a lot of different ways to describe this, and it's pretty far away. And meanwhile, we're all in a tempest. This is the craziest storm you've ever seen in consciousness. And it's this massive wave of energy coming down upon us. And right this minute, the way that I perceive it in my body is it's kind of around right here in the body. So like earlier in the week, it was here, and it's coming down slowly, and it's going to affect the way we speak to each other. And if you're feeling into the illusions of being separate from things and you're trying to control that and remain separate, this is going to be very uncomfortable. And you're going to feel like your little reality is shattering. And it's going to be very intense. But if you're willing to just be with these things and not resist them, then you're going to notice that a lot of different shadow work can be done and changed and shifted and recognized and accepted. And the best way to do shadow work is to become the shadow. And as you become the shadow, you figure out that it's not dark at all. It's made of light too. It's just light under pressure. So I'm perceiving that as it comes through the heart space, men on this planet, the masculine heart space is going to shift in a big way. And then as it moves through the human power centers of the solar plexus and the stomach, we're going to feel like we're either losing all of our power or gaining it, or both. These polarities are going to show up that are really important. And then it's going to hit the female power center, the root. And this is going to cause a reaction in the feminine. And this is when Kali comes in. And what's kind of cool is this wave, it's not going to be very pleasant if you resist it, but if you're willing, it will show you any patterns. It will show you the things that you need to shift in your consciousness and dissolve with your attention and your meditating and your processing. And it's going to be very specific, really key polarities and nuances that are going to affect you all the time, that are now up in your face. So I had a session with a lady this morning in South Africa, and this huge polarity that's always been there is now so in her face: sabotage and support. And so for her, she's trying to navigate this incredible polarity. But when you do that and you really understand the whole of it, you get to the sort of end of the book where all of the answers are. You never get the answers at the beginning of the book. It's always at the end. And so now she's towards the end of this learning about this, and it's her opportunity to fully embody the whole polarity, which gets you off the hamster wheel and gets you on the middle way out of the craziness that happens with the polarity. So the craziness is happening in the waves of the water. It's the earth and the waters below who are being interacted with on a galactic level in a very powerful way with the stars and the sun and the galaxy and so much more at this 12,000 year cycle. And then we have in the air, if you've ever driven through a snowstorm, this is what it looks like to me. And it's miserable because you can't see anything. And you often have to pull over for longer periods of time to wait to see if it'll clear up. And what do you do when you wait? You'd sit there and you might eat a snack and like drink some water and chit chat. And it feels really boring and awful to have to wait for the snowstorm to clear. And then you got to get the guts up to, all right, we're going to try to drive a little farther. And that's how it feels right now. It feels really difficult, like it's almost impossible. We know that there's this thing way far ahead of us that we're headed towards that's inevitable. But trying to get there is a whole other deal. And there's these moments of feeling completely stopped and stagnant, and then other moments where you have to be so laser focused just to get to this little tiny point A and point B. So that's this navigation of a tempest in consciousness, this shattering of false realities, the shattering of the hell worlds that people believe are real, and this realization that you're not separate from any of it. And people resist that. So there's that lull that's going to happen as all this energy hits the feminine power center, and Kali comes up. She comes through this reaction, and it's the embodiment of it. And for us as the feminine embodiment, it's going to be very uncomfortable because a lot of us have been taught not to be angry. And if we are, we find that it just takes us over and we can't control it. So what happens, I think, is that anger is really hot and it's a very intense energy, and it wants to move up through the body. And it usually comes out through the voice and through the eyes as tears, and like having a sharp tongue as yelling and anger. But my challenge for all of us is to let it move all the way up and out, to be a conduit of Kali's sword. And her sword is righteous. But what is the other energy of Kali? It's delight. It's delight. Like nobody ever looks at Kali and says, she's delighted, but that's exactly what's going on. She's absolutely delighted because now she gets to cut through the illusion. And this is the heart of the divine feminine taking the reins of power back. Now, as she comes down, it's a second wave, and it's the clear light of existence. It's clarity. It's extremely pure. It's so clear that you begin to see light that doesn't have a source. And that's the true light of existence. It doesn't have a source because it's everything. And that's going to be the beacon that leads us to get over this next huge hump over the next year and get into being able to see the inevitable, where we're really heading as a species. So this is what I've been noticing over the past month or so, and it's been extremely intense and very personal in my life, which is simply another little microcosm of the universe. But especially the masculine is struggling with this tempest because they're not used to being so formless as the feminine has to be. And the energy of the tempest here in consciousness, as things crumble and fall apart, is getting louder and louder and louder. And yet they have to stay, they feel like they have to stay at the head of the ship and focus on where they're going to get through the day, just through the day. And so if it's feeling unbearable, if it's feeling difficult and like driving through a snowstorm and sometimes boring and stagnant, you're right on track. Merge with it. You're not separate from being stagnant or bored. You're not separate from chaos. It's actually really important that you know this part so that it won't have power over you later when it counts. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Sara, who is our priestess, and especially the priestess of the flower kingdom, because there's messages there for us too about our experience in time right now.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and I love what both you have shared, Kayla and Elizabeth, and it leads me straight into the nature being that is asking to speak to us today. So there is a little tiny, well, it's not so tiny actually, it's probably about this big. Obviously, it depends on how adult it is. That I don't know if it grows in the States. I suspect it does, but I don't actually know. It's called Impatiens. Do any of you know Impatiens that grow your side of it? Does?
I don't know if
Okay.
it grows here, but
Okay, yeah. So you often find it along the lanes in the countryside. Some people call it a weed, and of course we know there are never weeds. It grows fairly abundantly. And what its doctrine of signatures is, it has a seed pod, and when it's ready to let go of its seeds, it does it with a, and you can actually hear the pods burst open. They're like, and all the seeds scatter. I've never actually heard that or been with it, but I hear it's quite a moment. So Impatiens is one of the Bach or Bach essences, however you want to pronounce it. So it's very easy to get hold of. And of course, its name tells us everything because it's Impatiens. It wants to be there now, which is what you were saying, Elizabeth. It's like, take me to heaven on earth now. But, you know, what you were saying is exactly Impatiens. So if we kind of go back to what the Dr. Batch said or says about it, he would say that it's really good when we feel impatient. So there are certain types of people who are more like that than others. Dr. Batch himself actually was an Impatiens as his constitution, which is maybe why he was such a pioneer and, you know, did so much in his life. So we can be impatient with ourselves or others. We can be irritable. It's also really good, and I'm just kind of speaking out of a kind of more textbooky stuff here, but it really helps us to see where this timing thing shows up in our lives. If we're not well and we want to get better, like tomorrow, I know that happens to me. It's like, you know, it's not an option not to be well, so I'm going to kind of like bulldoze my way through it, you know. That has been me, and I'm sure others can align with that. So, and actually when we feel that, it can actually sometimes be a good sign, because it shows that the spark of life is taking us forward. So it's not always, it's about the polarities. You know, Impatiens can be huge passion, and it could be, you know, this is just like really important, I need to do it, get out of my way kind of thing. So there are all ways that it can kind of come in our lives, and this little tiny batch flower can really, really help us with this. Maybe we need to go on a sort of daily dose of it for the next few years. If you look a little bit deeper into Impatiens, it's also in Rescue Remedy, which most people have heard of. So and rescue remedy is taken when there's an emergency of, you know, which could go from stubbing your toe to something much larger. So, you know, so it's there as well to help us kind of like come back into the present and kind of take a deep breath and allow whatever is going on to be there. It also aligns with the gallbladder and the liver meridian, which are about anger and timing, and it's the time, springtime, when everything kind of goes and out as well. So there's lots of kind of good things about it as well. So yeah, I think Impatiens is asking me to celebrate it rather than to say, no, it's not, you know, rather than have maybe our more traditional view on impatience not being a good thing. It actually has a great, great value. So I also wanted to talk a little bit my own personal experience of Impatiens and how flowers and nature can help us move backwards and forwards between that time polarity. I think I may have spoken about this in a previous meeting actually, but I'm guided to say it again, probably because I think it's really important. Many years ago, Snowdrop told me that she had the ability to work with us to heal not just ourselves now, but the past and the future, and that nothing was impossible, nothing. So she's a real sort of quantum girl there, but she could also reach back into the past and help and heal that. And I think we all know on some level when we stay in the present moment, and I've been doing a lot of kind of inner heart healing just in the last few days, and when we tap in and really look at all those things, we know that the energy shifts and the cords just kind of fall away to anything that we were attached to. So nature has a beautiful role to help us be in that moment. Years ago, when I used to feel very, very, very anxious, horribly so, I would always go and sit with the trees or just go for a walk with them, literally. And I would stand next to these big trees and think, wow, you're so rooted and you're so calm. You can't go anywhere when, you know, the SHIT hits the fan. You're just there. And I was just like really wanting to embody some of that ability just to be in that moment, whatever that meant. And so my experience with Impatiens, sometimes I've often found that the flowers have been a little bit elusive for me, and I've always thought, why is everybody else seeing XYZ flower? I've never seen it, sort of thing. And then one day I suddenly meet the flower. Yarrow's another one that I had this relationship with. Why is everybody else got a yarrow thing going, and I didn't even really know what it looks like because I'd never met it. Same with impatiens. And then one day I'll just bump into them, and all of a sudden they're around me and always have been. I've just never seen them. So in the lanes here where I live, I met impatiens a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, there you are. And so I made an essence with her just for myself, and she really helped me to connect in to my divine purpose. It wasn't that I wasn't working with it anyway, but I just felt in that when you make a flower essence, you're transported into the time and energy of that flower. If you sit next to the bowl, you're actually part of the making, but if you can just witness what's going on, you can really kind of sink yourself into the energy. So I really felt this ability to know that everything was in its right moment, and that I was in the right place and at the right time, and I didn't need to hurry or do anything differently, and I could just sit there and be. And really, for me, it helped me to understand impatiens because I'd never really got it before, but being with the plant and making her essence really helped me to just know that everything was okay and that I didn't need to do anything differently, or nor did anybody else. We were just all in that place. So I feel that the impatiens flower is very valuable to us right now. It's a bit like your snowstorm. She's the flower version of the snow being in the snowstorm. Is let's just be here and allow the trajectory to take us forward in its own time. So I think that's all from impatiens. So I'm going to hand over to Nalini now, and I look forward to hearing what you're going to share, Nalini.
So do I. So it'll be interesting. Now, there's a lot that has come through lately, as we all know. We've spoken about the turbulence, be it impatience or impatiens or snowstorms or the eclipses and everything else that's going on. I find myself seated in Kairos time. And Kairos time, as Kaylin brought up at the beginning, from the Greek, it's what's optimal or important in the moment, in each moment. It also translated as weather. And we know what that's been like lately. But the way to deal with it is not to like constantly pull up your weather app and like, what's it going to do today? And how am I going to deal with it? Which is how our minds are trained. But that's Chronos time. And Chronos, as Kaylin would tell you, is related to Saturn. Much of these are Saturnian energies, which are not bad. Saturn gets a very bad rap, except in Vedic astrology. And it's a way of, yes, we tend to live in these bodies and in this life in a linear manner, but we are sorely mistaken if we think that's what's real. So from Kairos time, it's each moment, like this is even too slow. It's each moment. And in the Vedic studies, like every 5 seconds, our consciousness shifts completely. And I love it when you say that to somebody, they're like, oh, well, where do I start? Which second is the one that I start with? And how many is 5? And where's the Chronos, right? But in Kairos time, they all exist at the same moment. And so there's always the flow of what we call linear, and there's always the moment, which is precious and of that clear light. And so instead of asking the question, what time is it? Or even what is it time for? It's sort of what's optimal right now? What is the opportunity right now? And the minute you ask the question, it's already the next moment, so it's shifted. But it's okay because you begin to get the in particular configuration of what you are. And that's what's important. It's not when things will happen or what we are doing or even what's going on, because we all perceive that differently anyway. And it's more what's available this precise moment, this precise second. And then, okay, we're already at the next one. So maybe relaxing into that. And I mean, I can speak from experience because for much of the training portion of my life, they could have put my picture under impatient. I mean, they have this saying that fools go where angels fear to tread. I went where the fools wouldn't go. And this is not a good thing. Let me tell you, I cannot recommend it. But no, there's a way to push through this. And I'm that girl, meet Gordian knot with a sword. And there is merit to that, but there's a different way to apply it that is not in the Saturnian, the Chronos way. There's a way to apply that in the moment of, there's a truth here. Not what is the truth and how do I find it and how do I get there, which is how we're all trained. But there is truth here. Let's just relax into it. So it's diving into the wave, because we all know we can't resist it. It's just, resistance is futile, and in a good way. Diving into the wave and letting it carry us. And what happens, or what has happened for me, is with each ripple, with each current within that wave, pardon me, I have shed, and we all do this, a form of identification, a structure. Again, Chronos, Saturn. Just that this is the major planet that helps us work with our structures, but it's working through each wave, each current, each ripple, and basically it's all happening at once. It's where we put our focus. Again, in the moment, there's a way where, this identity, what's the truth of it? Not like, it needs to be blasted away because it's ego. Well, yeah, everything is ego. And so let's just blast ourselves into oblivion, because why not? But there's this other way of looking at it, as this identity is the illusion. It isn't real, except that we're living it as real. But each of these they shed as you go within the wave, and the wave isn't going to grind you down into the sand unless you resist it. I mean, beach balls have a great time with waves. They pop along up on the top, and they don't care how big they are. It could be a ripple, it could be a tsunami. So what? It's just having its little fun time. We are in the immersion now, and every being on this world is a star seed. It comes, a configuration of elements from all over the place, places we don't even know about. And star seeds, star streams learn by immersion. That's why we're here. We are immersed in experience. So as we take that, instead of I happen to agree with Elizabeth about the ocean of perception and time. So we're speaking a little bit together here, but it's all happening at once. And so it's like, well, this seems to be this way. Take a deep breath. And there is not even what's the truth here, because it is gone, but there's truth here. Settle. Nature settles and is, like the flowers, they bloom or they burst their pods. I used to love watching milkweed pods do that. Or the dandelions, if you don't get them before they go to seed, hello, dandelion field, and that's what they do. It's how they are. Dandelions don't perceive themselves as a weed or as a problem or as, I'm taking over someone's yard. Probably a good thing. But, this is how the moment unfolds. And so it's maybe paying a little more attention or giving a little more honor to that Kairos version of time within the chronology that we appear to be in, and knowing that all of those timelines, all of those trajectories are present in each moment. And we hop timelines all the time. And what if that inevitable island isn't what we have believed, projected, expected it to be? What if it's here? And we just get there by going all kinds of outward and obtuse and abstruse ways. And in the moment, in that Kairos time is where it really lives. And can we live that way? Yes, I do that almost all the time. Not all the time. There's always, everything is a work in progress. But it's possible. The nature does it. The flowers do it. The trees do it. I used to love the trees too. When I was a little girl, I would go out on my balcony after we moved out to the country, and I would look at the trees and have chats with them. They were my best friends. And I would so envy them. You're rooted and you just reach for the light. All you do is reach for the light. Why can't I just do that? Why do I have to pretend to go out in the world? I just want to do this. Well, we are that all the time. And so it's the union of what we perceive to be a linear experience with the moment that is the weather of the divine. So anyway, that's my 2 cents for our gathering today. And thank you, all of you. I mean, so much fun to hear what everyone has to say.